Hello and welcome back to Marketing Management and Brand Identity in the Music Industry. Today we are talking about advances and the advances that artists get on recording their music. As always, folks, you can find this presentation and the slides on our Google Classroom if you would like to go through it a little bit more in depth and at your own pace. Whoa, there was a spider that just came right down in front of my face. She is now dead. Dun dun dun. All right, let's begin. So, royalties. Royalty summary. So, remember, last week we talked about royalties. Okay, royalties are based on the sale of records. There's a royalty rate that is applied that is usually, in today's music world, from 13 to 16% of either the wholesale or the retail price of the album or single song. And that's depending on the contract type that you have as the artist with your label or the company that you're working with. Remember, there are lots of deductions that happen that are taken off of your royalties. So sure, you may get 16% out of a $16 album, but remember, there are deductions taken off. The packaging deduction for shipping, the breakage deduction. If any of those albums, CDs or vinyls even, are breaking in the process of transporting them from the manufacturer to the stores, there's a free good deduction. Remember, that is applied to musicians. Musicians don't make any royalties on any free albums that are given out as incentive for retail stores to purchase more. And remember, there's a reserve deduction. So if retail stores are not selling all of their albums and they wish to return them, there's a deduction that can be actually taken off of the amount of money that the artists make. Remember, these deductions are mainly for the physical realm, right? The physical sale of CDs, or even today in vinyl, because there's a lot of new albums that are coming out in both CD form and vinyl. There's this retro kind of movement in terms of bringing back vinyl, which is awesome. But the thing to remember is that in looking at your contracts, and an artist really needs to pay attention to this, you don't want to have these deductions in the digital age. And some labels will try to put them in there. And if you don't have a good entertainment lawyer while reading through your contract, these deductions can sneak in there, and you don't want them to be in your contract, because in the digital age there is no shipping or packaging or ability to break an album. There's no free good deduction because there's no incentive for these streaming services like iTunes to pump out to give away anything for free, because everything is on demand, and there's no reserve deduction. Remember, iTunes isn't giving back any of these singles that they don't sell because it is an on-demand service. So keep that in mind as we move into advances. So what are advances? Well, artists get advanced payments of their royalties before they record an album. Record companies do this for many, many different reasons, but the main reason is that these companies and the labels want the artist to record an album. And so they will actually give you a lump sum fee, or a lump sum advance of money to say, hey, we'll give you this 10,000 chunk of money, which is actually usually more, to record this album. And we call these album fund advances. Okay, and remember, all of the costs associated with recording the album have to be taken out of the advance. And so a new artist may receive an album fund advance. Okay, a brand new artist may receive an album fund advance from a major label of from $50,000 to $100,000. A mid-level artist typically will receive $100,000 to $200,000 as an album fund advance. And in the case of superstars, they may receive an album fund advance of $300,000 to $1 million. Independent labels also pay out album fund advances. They are much smaller because they are independent labels. They're indie labels. But they still pay out a chunk of money, between $2,500 and $25,000. But you have to remember that album fund advances, so let's say you're a brand new artist and you receive an album fund advance of $100,000. you have to take into account that a portion of that money is going to be spent by the record label to actually record the album. Okay, the company, the label doesn't pay for that. It comes out of your advance. So album advancers, like I said, are paid to offset the costs of recording the album. There are many costs that go into allocating a specific amount given to the artist in terms of their advance. So an advance will have deductions for paying the recording costs, paying for the recording studio, paying for the producer, the arranger, the sound engineers, as well as personal expenses of the artist, all come out of the advance. So let's say you're a brand new artist and you're kind of wrapped up in the excitement of being this new artist, and you want some fancy bottled water in the recording studio when you record. Well, the label isn't paying for that. That's coming out of your advance. So let's look at an example. So let's say the artist gets $100,000 as an album advance. Okay, well, the company will give the artist $20,000 upfront. That's your money. That's cash in your pocket. And the rest of that $100,000 advance is going to be held in reserve to pay for the recording costs. So while the advance numbers in the contracts look really great, say, hey man, I'm making $100,000 on this album. I haven't even recorded anything yet, and they're giving me $100,000. Well, that's not quite right and not quite true. The company's going to give you $20,000. You can take that money and put it in your pocket. That they cannot touch that $20,000. But the rest of it, the $80,000 that's remaining, they're going to hold in reserve, because that cost, the cost of the recording studio, the engineers, the producer, even your fancy bottled water is going to come out of that $80,000 that's being held in reserve. Now, if there's anything left over, so let's say the recording costs don't add up to that $80,000. Okay, then you're going to get whatever's remaining and you'll put that in your pocket. So let's break it down a little bit here. So you get a $100,000 advance. The recording costs that are set aside are $80,000. Now they're set aside. Okay, they're put in reserve, and the label is going to dip into that reserve and take whatever they need out of that $80,000 to pay for the recording costs. The artist will receive $20,000. 100% of that $20,000 goes to the artist as a personal advance. Like I said, if the recording costs are less than $80,000, say they only needed $60,000 of that $80,000 for the recording costs, the artist would receive an additional $20,000 because that's what's remaining. And so the artist would then get $40,000 as an advance, cash in hand, money in the bank. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. I'm going to Disneyland. Because the recording costs came under budget. They came below that $80,000 that was held in reserve, and only $60,000 was used up. And so the rest goes to the artist. But what happens if the costs go above the budget? So instead of needing $80,000, now we need $90,000 for the recording costs. Well, you've already got your $20,000 cash in hand, money in the bank, going to Disneyland money. But now the record company is asking you, hey, you know what? We need about $10,000 more to pay for the recording costs. We've got the best producer out there to work with us. Now, usually the artist has to pay that difference. Because if the artist refuses, what will happen is the recording company they have the right to terminate that contract before you even step foot in the recording studio. So it's really important for you to recognize that you have this budget and that you should stay within it unless you want to be paying out of pocket that advance, that personal advance that you got, that $20,000 that you have, money in the bank, going to Disneyland. You want to hang on to that. You don't want to be paying out of that because that's your livelihood. That's the money you're making. So, advances, like I said, are recouped from the artist's royalties. Many people think that the recording company is loaning the money to the artist. But there is a difference between an advance and a loan. You don't have to pay back that money. The only way the record company can recoup their investment is to sell more records. That is the only way. And that is the only way the artist is going to make money on royalties if they either didn't receive an advance, or if that advance was small enough that they can still earn money from royalties. So if the artist doesn't generate enough in royalties to pay the recouped fees back, okay, that the record company has to eat that cost. Doesn't come out of the artist doesn't have to pay back those recouped fees. They just have to eat that cost. Okay, the label cannot pursue the artist personally for any unrecouped royalties. So as an artist, it's really important for you to get as big an advance on your royalties as possible, because you're not going to see a lot. Remember, out of a $16 album that's selling at HMV or Sunrise Records, you're only getting back about just less than $2 in terms of royalties. So you want to make sure you get a good chunk of money as an advance, just in case your albums don't sell. Okay? It is very important now more than ever for an artist to get an advance up front, especially in the digital world, because there's no guarantee that your album is going to sell or that your single is going to make a lot of money. Okay? As well, there are costs associated with being a major musician that typically the artist has to account for, typically, such as creating a music video. So creating music videos, only 50% of video costs will be recoupable from the artist royalties. The label will pay for 50% of your video, but the other 50% comes out of your royalties. Any money you're making on your albums, 50% of the cost of the video, the music video, goes from your royalties directly to making the music video, to pay for that. The label isn't going to pay 100% of the fees. Because you are trying to get your sound out there, the label will pay for half, which is a considerable cost. Okay? Some of the top producers in the 1990s, they would charge $1 million to make one music video. Okay? A good video now will cost you about $50,000, okay, or more, depending on who you get. But remember, for each album, artists typically make 4 videos. And that can be really expensive, up to $200,000 that you are, as the artist, are liable to pay half of, because it's coming out of your royalties. But remember, these are recoupable fees. And so, for example, let's say you're not making enough from your royalties to pay for that 50% of making the music video. Well, the record label is going to eat that cost. You don't have to pay that cost if you can't. Okay? But if you can't pay that cost, that means you're making no royalties, because the company, the label, is going to take all your royalties to pay for these recoupable things. And you're not going to see any of it. But you don't have to pay out of your pocket for these things. It's coming out of your royalties. There are also added costs. Okay, so there's some other added costs that go against your advances, like independent promotion costs. Independent promoters have special relationships with radio programmers. Even to this day, it's important to get sounds out on the radio. Radio, okay, is still one of the main avenues that people listen to new music, that people listen to music and how music becomes popular. Independent promotion costs can range between $50,000 and $300,000 per single to promote. And that all is recoupable from your royalties. And remember, 50%. The label will pay for 50%. Okay, independent promotion costs, okay, remember, through indie labels, a lot of the time, it's a 50-50 split, and you're going to be making a little bit more money. But those costs tend to be lower as well through indie labels, because they don't have those relationships with the big name people, the big name promoters and producers. Okay, just remember, it is difficult for artists to generate royalties beyond that initial advance, because any royalty costs, right, have to be used to pay for 50% of any of these other costs, such as the music video and the promotion costs. And so a lot of the time, artists really aren't making a lot on royalties because that's going towards paying for these other things, such as promoting their music and through the radio and through making music videos. So it's really important for you as the artist to get a good upfront chunk in advance. Money in your pocket, cash in the bank. We're heading to Disney World this time. Okay, we've taken a look at, or talked a little bit about independent labels, and they are better in many, many ways. Because remember, independent labels have agreements of 50-50 profit sharing. 50% of everything made goes to the label, and 50% of everything made goes to the artist. That's really important to remember when when being faced with the fact of either signing with a major label, or an indie label. There are lower video production costs, lower independent promotion costs, lower recuperating costs that the label's going to ask from your royalties, and you have a relatively good royalty rate, okay? And typically this means more money in your pocket. But remember, it's still tough to get more money due to the recoup costs, right? Those labels are still going to ask for 50% of the cost to make a video, 50% of the cost to promote your music, through the radio. Most artists are still making royalties simply through advances, not necessarily through the sale of their albums. So it's really important to always remember to get as much as you can up front, because your royalties are going to go to help pay for your music videos and the promotion of your sound. So, a couple of questions for you. Are you better off with a 15% deal as your royalty rate with a major label, or a 50-50 deal with an independent label? Now, even though the indie label deal sounds so much better, okay, it's not always so cut and dry. It's not always so clear cut. You have to consider the recoupable and non-recoupable costs for each major label and independent label. So I've created this table here for you. Okay, you can also find this in our Google Classroom. Okay, there's recoupable costs and non-recoupable costs. So for a major label, those recoupable costs that the label is going to ask for are through your advances, touring, the video costs, the promotion, okay, and publicists. Non-recoupable costs, so simply all of these things, okay, that come out of your royalties, okay. So, and then when we look at an independent label, there are so many more recoupable costs that the independent label is going to ask of you. The non-recoupable costs, so what the independent label is going to pay, are your salary, okay, and the cost of doing business, the day-to-day business of being a record label, an independent label. But the recoupable costs are quite a bit more. The amount of money that you're paying out of your royalties to an indie label is a lot more. Whereas in a major label, it's a little bit more evenly split. Now, when I say indie radio promotion, I mean independent radio promotion, not independent labels. And indie publicists, independent publicists, people that they hire outside of the label. So take a look at this chart. It's really important, very, very informative. That's all that we have for today, folks, in terms of marketing management and brand identity in the music industry. As always, if you have any questions, because we're dealing with math, I'm not the best with math, but it's pretty straightforward math, I think. If you have any questions about the math behind royalties or the math behind advances, please fire me an email, let me know. And don't forget to answer this week's discussion question relating to advances. It's an interesting topic, and one that I think is very important for artists to understand and recognize and be able to read clearly in their contracts before either signing with an independent label or a major label. That's all we have for this week, folks. Have a wonderful week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to chatting and discussing about advances this week. Adios for now.